In this video, we'll be going over cards with honest-like effects, which are basically cards with hand trap effects that affect the battle in some way, usually in the form of extra attack points, but not always. And at number 10, we'll just start off with Honest, since this entire list is kind of named after him. Now, this card popularized the effect of giving an incredible attack boost from the hand during the battle phase, as what it does is, if one of your light monsters battles, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to let your monster gain the attack of your opponent's monster until the end of the turn. So basically, it allowed any of your light monsters to beat over any of your opponent's monsters, and also allowed you to protect any of your light monsters from attacks during your opponent's turn. But that's not all. The effect would stack on itself, as it wasn't once per turn. So if you had 3 honest effects during the same battle phase, they would all just stack on top of each other, which is why this card was put on the ban list in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! That way people can get lucky wins if they happen to draw 3 copies of Honest. And since the effect lasted until the end of the turn, if you used it on a card like a Sewer Priest, you could keep that incredible attack boost for all of its attacks, as that card could attack all of your opponent's monsters once each. So just attacking your opponent's strongest monster first, and then using Honest would allow it to keep that a high attack boost for all the other attacks, and possibly win you the game. Honest was just a super strong card in the early days of the game, and rarely sees play nowadays, because the game doesn't really revolve around the battle phase like that anymore, unless a card from an archetype just happens to also have an Honest-like effect. And at number 9, we have Bujingi Crane. This was the Honest-specific card for the Bujin archetype, which was all about protecting Bujin Yamato, who would allow you to selectively fill up your graveyard with Bujin monsters while also keeping copies of Bujingi Crane in your hand. As what Crane did was, if one of your Bujin Beast Warrior type monsters attacked, you could send this card from your hand to the graveyard to double that monster's original attack, and only during damage calculation, so it wouldn't last until the end phase like Honest. Now, since the Bujin archetype is full of light monsters, they could also use Honest, but the advantage Crane had was that it could be searched out a lot easier and was a more reliable attack option, even if Honest was still technically more useful. Although it's not like Bujin players didn't use both of them. The Bujin archetype did have a rank 4 monster called Bujin Te Susanoo, who could attack all of your opponent's monsters once each, which is great with Honest-like effects, but since Bujingi Crane only worked for one battle, it couldn't really be abused like a Sewer Priest. Although another benefit to Bujingi Crane was that it would reset their attack at the end of the damage, which meant if one of your monsters got their attack lowered by an opponent's Blackwing Gale the Whirlwind, for example, using Crane would still give them double their original attack, and then at the end of that battle, it would just go back to their original attack. So the Bujin archetype could largely negate attack modifiers thanks to their Honest-specific card. Although this card is kind of too balanced. It's not once per turn, you could use it multiple times if you had other copies, but the effect itself is done in a way where you can't stack them in the same attack, which is a theme you'll see with a lot of the other cards in this list. Basically, Konami acknowledged the mistake of being able to stack Honest, so all of the cards that were based on it afterwards have all kinds of effects and limitations to that potential, save a few of them which were created around the same time period as Honest. And at number 8, we have Score, the Melodious Diva. This card has the effect that if one of your Melodious monsters battles, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to make your opponent's monster have 0 attack and defense until the end of the turn. Now, out of all of the Honest-like effects, most of them don't affect your opponent's monster. They usually boost your own monster in some way, so this one can actually be stacked with Honest, as a lot of the Melodious monsters are light attribute, although you'd have to be careful about which order you use them, since Honest does give you the attack equal to your opponent's monster's current attack, and not their original attack. Now, Melodious monsters are not a very battle-focused archetype, and one of their strengths is the fact that they're very hard to defeat, so this card does give them a little bit of an archetype-specific way of actually destroying your opponent's monsters by battle, which is something they kind of lack, and would allow you to beat over pretty much any monster that you use the effect on, assuming they're not unaffected by card effects like Ultimate Falcon. So Bujingi Crane could allow you to beat over almost anything with doubling of the attack, but Score the Melodious Diva allows you to beat over anything that isn't unaffected by card effects, which is why I only give it a slightly higher spot on this list. And at number 7, we have Blackwing Kalute the Moon Shadow. This card is specific to the Blackwing archetype and has the effect where, if a Blackwing monster is in a battle, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to have your monster gain 1400 attack until the end of the turn. Now, what's unique about Kalute is that it gives a very specific amount of attack instead of an attack being dependent on which monsters you're battling, as it always gives you 1400 attack. And also, this effect does stack in the same way as Honest. You could absolutely use multiple Kalutes on top of each other in order to give a high amount of attack, up to 4200 attack if you stacked 3 of them, which was a pretty standard move in Blackwing decks, since that deck is very efficient at searching out cards from that deck thanks to Blackwing Whirlwind, and Blackwing monsters were very adept at battling. They had Blue Flame, which could allow you to special summon Blackwings from the deck if it destroyed monsters by battle. There's even Bora the Spear, which could deal piercing damage and special summon itself from the hand. So if you boosted it to a high attack power value and it attacked over a low defense monster, that was a good way to sometimes seal off a winning game. And even Sirocco the Dawn, which could combine the attack of all of your Blackwings into one monster, which could then just beat over anything your opponent controls, and then use a couple of Kalutes from your hand to deal the extra amount of damage needed in order to win. Kalute just worked very well with the deck to the point where it was thought of as kind of broken in Blackwings, and even appeared on the ban list for a while, even though it strictly would give it a less attack boost than Honest most of the time. I'm pretty sure it's because of Kalute and Honest being so powerful that led to all of the restrictions to Honest-like cards in the future. And at number 6, we have Nekroz of Decisive Armor. This card has the effect where you can discard it from your hand to increase the attack of a Nekroz monster you control by 1000 until the end of the turn. Now, unlike Honest, you can technically activate this whenever you want, but it can also be used during the battle phase, and in an archetype that's all about the ritual monsters having both on-field and hand effects, as this card can also be brought out like a normal ritual monster, and then when it hits the field, it allows you to destroy and banish one of your opponent's set cards. Which honestly isn't one of the best effects out of all the Nekroz monsters, but it does have a pretty high attack, and it does have a pretty decent hand effect. You see, one of the strategies that Nekroz decks like to implement is bringing out Nekroz of YuGiOh in order to lock your opponent out of extra deck monster effects, which means your opponent usually wants to destroy YuGiOh as soon as possible, and generally they'll try to do that by attacking over it with a monster that has more than 2200 attack. So a Decisive Armor in your hand can allow you to protect your YuGiOh from most monsters in the game, as they would have to beat 3200 attack, assuming Decisive Armor was in your hand, which gives Nekroz a little bit more of a boost when it comes to locking down your opponent out of using their extra deck monsters. Now, this obviously doesn't have the best Honest-like effect out of all the ones I've talked about so far, but it's definitely one of the more useful ones in its archetype, which is a really good archetype. And at number 5, we have Elemental Hero Honest Neos. This card is specific to the Elemental Hero archetype and is very obviously inspired by Honest, even though its effect is more like Kalute. And what this card does is you can discard this card from your hand whenever you want to increase the attack of a hero monster by 2500 until the end of the turn. So you don't need to wait for the battle phase to use this card, just like Decisive Armor, which means you can get this card into the graveyard in order to use it for a Miracle Fusion if you wanted, to both gain its powerful attack increase while also using it as a fusion material. It also has an effect on the field where you can basically discard any hero monster from your hand to have this card gain that monster's attack until the end of the turn, essentially allowing you to turn any hero in your hand into an Honest-like effect for this card, since this card can be used during the battle phase. Now, since the attack it gives is so high, at 2500, this effect has a hard once per turn on it, so there's no stacking it with other copies of itself like you can with Kalute, same with its other effect. Now, the reason this card is higher on this list is because it fits into its archetype very well. It can be easily searched out, can be used like an Honest during your opponent's turn to prevent one of your cards from being destroyed by battle and giving it a whole bunch of attack, or to allow your heroes to beat over anything. It's more flexible in how you can use it since you don't need to wait for a battle to happen, and can just be used as a combo piece. Plus, even though you can't stack it, a single Elemental Hero Honest Neos is almost as good as using 2 Kalutes anyway, which is really good when it comes to an Honest-like effect. And at number 4, we have Prohibit Snake. This card has the effect where if a Cyberse Link monster battles an opponent's monster, at the start of the damage step, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to bounce your opponent's monster. So unlike all the other Honest-like effects so far, this one doesn't even affect any monster attack power values at all. It does have an excellent removal effect, which allows you to non-target, non-destruction remove a card from the field by returning it to the hand, which means this card is actually pretty valuable in decks that play Cyberse Link monsters, like Salaman Greats for example. They can just go into an easy Salamangreat to Bale Links and then run into any of your opponent's monsters to get rid of it with the effect of Prohibit Snake. And it also allows you to protect your Cyberse Link monsters too, if your opponent tries to attack into them. But if that's all this card did, I'm not sure if it would really see the amount of competitive play it has. It's more or less its second effect that kind of assures its spots in certain decks. You see, it also has a graveyard effect, where if a Cyberse monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, and this card is in your graveyard when that happens, you can banish any other card from your graveyard to then add a level 4 or lower Cyberse monster from your graveyard to your hand, which, funny enough, does allow it to add itself back to your hand. Now, both of its effects are hard once per turn, so you can't send this card to the graveyard, add it back to your hand, and then use it again all in the same turn. You can add it back to your hand while also sending it to the graveyard in the same turn, but you won't be able to use its hand effect twice, is all I'm saying. And seeing as 30% of Link monsters are Cyberse type, this card is actually kind of live in a lot of normal decks. Link Cross and IP Masquerena are both very popular Link Cyberse monsters that see a lot of play in all kinds of decks. So theoretically, Prohibit Snake could be live in decks that use those two cards. Although realistically it only sees play in Salamangreat decks, since that's the only meta deck that's basically nothing but Cyberse monsters. And at number 3, we have Trickstar Corobane. This card has the effect where if a Trickstar monster you control battles an opponent's monster, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to double that monster's original attack until the end of the turn. So basically like the Bujingi Crane of the Trickstar archetype, except Corobane's effect is a hard once per turn. Now, what's great about Trickstar Corobane is that it also has a much better first effect, where if you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. And with this card having 2000 attack, that makes this one of the strongest cards with this kind of special summoning benefit. So it actually sees lots of play in different kinds of decks, and not just Trickstar decks. Although, funny enough, Trickstar decks do not really care about the battle phase very much, and even with an excellent card like Trickstar Corobane, they wouldn't play it very much. It saw much more play outside of pure Trickstar decks, and was more used in Trickstar decks that were splashed into other kinds of decks, alongside cards like Honest, since a lot of them are also the light attribute. Although Trickstar Corobane also has one of the harshest restrictions on its Honest-like effect, where you can only use either of its two effects once per turn. You can't both special summon this card and use another copy of it from your hand in order to double the attack during the battle phase. And you also can't use multiple copies of them in your hand to increase multiple different Trickstar cards' attacks for that turn. But the Trickstar archetype is really good at searching their cards out, and cards which can special summon themselves are very valuable, as they're generally great combo pieces, which is why this card gets a high spot on this list. It's more useful for the on-field effect, but it also has a good Honest-like effect. And at number 2, we have Aleister the Invoker. This card is the main combo piece in the Invoker engine, which allows you to go into all kinds of good fusion monsters, as when it's normal summoned, you get to add one of your fusion spells to your hand. Then the fusion spell has a graveyard effect, which basically allows you to add this card back to your hand, and then it has another effect where it can send itself from your hand to the graveyard to increase the attack of a fusion monster you control by 1000. And none of Aleister's effects are once per turn. So if you have 3 copies of this in your hand, you can stack them all in the same fusion monster to give them 3000 more attack. Now, that's obviously not as much as Kalute, but this card is much more useful and also just happens to have an Honest-like effect on top of everything else it does. This card just kind of does it all, and is also the most played of any of the cards on this list, which is why it takes a high spot. And at number 1, we have Zoodiac Whiptail. This is a Zoodiac monster which can attach itself to one of your Zoodiac Exceeds monsters as a material during either player's turn, and has the effect that if it's attached to a Zoodiac monster basically, that card will gain the effect where after damage calculation you get to banish your opponent's monster that it battled. Now, what makes this an Honest-like effect is that all of the Zoodiac Exceeds monsters have the effect, where they gain attack equal to all of the Zoodiac monsters attached to them as materials. And Zoodiac Whiptail is the only Zoodiac monster which can attach itself as a material on a quick effect from the hand, which gives those Exceeds monsters an additional 1200 attack, and hence the Honest-like effect. Now, Zoodiac Whiptail is kind of a monster of an Honest card in Zoodiacs, because Zoodiac decks are able to very easily get out their Exceeds monsters, as that's kind of their gimmick. They're able to go into their Exceeds monster easier than any other archetype in the game. And if your opponent tries to destroy your Zoodiac XC's monsters by battle, you can punish them for that by attaching a Whiptail to that monster during the battle, so that they lose their monster afterwards, or to potentially allow them to survive that battle, since they do gain an attack and defense boost. They can also be used to get rid of indestructible monsters. You can just attack into one of your opponent's hard to get rid of monsters, attach a Whiptail to that XC's monster, and then at the end of the damage step, it will banish that card. You will lose your Zoodiac monster in the process if they had lower attack, but it will still banish at the end of the damage step regardless. Zoodiac Whiptail just gave the archetype really good battle phase presence, and an archetype that was already really good at everything else, especially with things like Zoodiac Dryden that had spell speed 2 destruction effects. There's a reason Zoodiacs were a tier 0 deck. So Zoodiac Whiptail is kind of like a traditional Honest-like effect, and a weaker version of Prohibit Snake. So it has 2 good Honest-like effects in one, an attack boost and a good monster removal effect, and an archetype that can use it super easily and is also good. So it definitely takes #1 spot on this list. Alright, and that's the list. This video idea was taken from a comment in a previous video, so if you have any more ideas for videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, did you know only 37.4% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel?